we are here with Kyle Gospinetich, and he is one of the people who have been working at Bazzite. And the reason why we've asked Kyle to be on the show today is because both Rich and I have used Bazzite on our devices, and we're like big fans of it. And we wanted to give Kyle and Bazzite a platform to, kind of talk about what it's been like to make SteamOS since Valve, for other hardware, since Valve says, well, we'll get to it eventually. And sometimes eventually, especially when we talk about Valve, sometimes eventually takes a really long time. And I got tired of waiting, so finally I installed it, and I was like, holy cow, this is great. Rich couldn't talk to me into it. Kyle, how long did it take to get from the ideation of, I'm going to try this, to first boot, and you were like, okay, this is working?
Yeah. Well, first, thank you both for having me on. It's great to be here. Timeline-wise, right? Bazzite was kind of born out of my enjoyment of Fedora's Atomic project. Um, they make this, great system called OS Tree that uses these cloud-native technologies to produce an OS. And Bazzite was born from me having, issues with SteamOS. I had been a big part of the SteamOS support community and Discord, just helping people like, how do I install my VPN? How can I get this particular web browser working? Any number of things. And I realized that as good as SteamOS's AB partition system is, Fedora already did this better. So the first version of Bazzite was really just, what would it take to port a couple of the SteamOS packages over to Fedora's packaging system and throw it in an image. I had that up and running within 3 weeks, I want to say, mostly thanks to watching George Castro's videos on the same topic. And from there, community interest grew. People came in and helped out where they could. And within about 6 months, we had what I would call a beta release of what Bazzite is today.
That's awesome.
So when just in order to get the audience up to speed, because I'm going to fill in for them because I'm not a developer. Rich is a developer. You're a developer. So my question is, when you talk about the Steam packages or the Valve packages, that first time that took you 3 weeks, what exactly do you mean by that? Just to get everybody on a base level.
Yeah. Well, SteamOS is a variant of Arch. So they take a snapshot of Arch Linux and they add their own secret sauce on top of it. That secret sauce is their packages. So they have the normal stuff that a lot of distros ship already, like GameScope. That's their display engine for what the game mode view is. And then they have more specific stuff. So there's a package for Jupyter hardware support. That's their code name for the Steam Deck that does all of the, BIOS updating or controller support and things like that. Or their dock updater. That's a package, those sorts of things. That's what had to be ported over to Fedora. The stuff that they don't readily open source on their GitHub.
Okay, that makes sense. What were you going to say, Rich?
Well, I was going to say, you talk about it in comparison to SteamOS, which makes sense, especially as a starting point for you. But a lot of people that are installing Bazzite or thinking of trying Bazzite, they might think of comparing to like Chimera or HoloISO and things like that. And so I'm also just thinking about like your mindset when you first got started, right? Like, the XKCD comic with the one more standard, right? Like there's 15 standards. I'm going to write one standard to solve them all. Okay, there's 16 standards now, right? So like, I guess, yeah, you answered part of that, but like what motivated you to really think of your implementation with Bazzite as sort of different from the what existed so far?
Yeah. Well, two parts to that, right? Like, Linux, I don't really see it as like a competitive space, For
Right.
everything that we built ourselves, we almost certainly took from someone else. Chimera made a GameScope session. We used it. There's no reason not to. Nobara had already kind of been the trailblazer for Fedora gaming improvements. We borrowed a lot from them. And I think, in turn, they've borrowed from us. Like, all of these different Linux gaming distros share with each other, and we all
For sure.
grow over time thanks to that. But, difference-wise, right, we are I think still currently the only OS tree based gaming image. And OS tree was, brand new tech. I would say that we were the first just because of timing. Um, and that's my main draw for why I built this. I
Yeah.
really like this model of operating system. I think the cloud native methodology has a lot of utility, both for letting people come in and make changes who are new to the whole scene and have maybe never contributed to an open source project to begin with, and for people who are already well in this scene. Cloud native is basically anything enterprise at all in the Linux space is going to be cloud native. So utilizing this tech the way we have just kind of opens us up for more contributions and makes it easier to work on for people.
Makes sense.
How,
Yeah.
how many people are working on it right now? Like you mentioned, it's easy for people to jump in. Do you know how many people are working, or is that, as somebody who's not a developer, maybe that's an unknowable thing?
It's well, all of our stuff is in GitHub, so you can look at it any time. Our core team is maybe 10 to 12 people,
Okay.
counting the Universal Blue folks, but we have, as of right now, 87 contributors. So it's well beyond our team making changes to it, and that's just what's visible in GitHub, of course, too, right? There's other stuff that we're pulling from the community where they didn't go through the effort of PRing it, but they gave it to us. So it's at least 100 different people have worked on Bazzite in one form or another.
That's amazing.
So
And-
when you go ahead, Rich.
Well, I was going to ask, you mentioned Universal Blue, and that was a question that Bill and I were having before, just a couple of weeks ago. Like, what is Universal Blue actually? So I understand it's an organization, building Fedora and kind of these cloud native container repositories. Is that right?
Yep, yep.
Okay.
Universal Blue is this org that George Castro started that has the explicit goal of pushing cloud native tech. So part of Bazzite's initial development was me finding one of George's videos on the topic and being interested in, making something based on that. In turn, George found me, which is why Bazzite is now under the Universal Blue umbrella. The way Universal Blue works is under that umbrella, they make all these different base images. So they take Fedora, make changes to it to make it a little bit better, and produce an image. And then in turn, Bazzite consumes that image and produces Bazzite. Essentially, they are our upstream in this arrangement. But from a community standpoint, Universal Blue's number one stated goal is to try and prove that this model of the Linux desktop not only can work, but is the future of the Linux desktop.
So when you say this model of the Linux desktop, and you're talking about, are you talking about this cloud native thing that you keep saying? Is that what you
Yes.
mean?
Yes.
Okay, so my audience or our audience, they're going to hear cloud native, and I think most of them will probably think, oh, that means it's running somewhere else and sending the information to my system. That's not what's actually happening, right? We're getting our streams crossed in this case. Is that
Yeah.
correct?
That's where the native part of cloud native comes in. The cloud part is you're taking technologies typically used in the cloud. So, a massive company like Netflix, Facebook, Microsoft might use this tech in the back end to run their servers, but we're doing it natively. We're taking this cloud technology and using it to build a better desktop.
Gotcha. Just
Yes.
wanted to make sure everyone's on the same page.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So you've been working on it for a while now. What kind of roadblocks are you running into when it comes to developing Bazzite?
It's pretty easy, Part of this model kind of gets rid of all of the typical roadblocks you'd see in a Linux desktop. The main things we deal with day to day are regressions. Most recently, there was a problem with the Linux kernel that broke a lot of AMD hardware in a very bad way. And on our end, once we identified that, it was a matter of a few line change in our container file to hold back the Linux kernel. Just make sure our users got the last previous good release for as long as they needed to, wait for the problems to resolve, and update them. So, from our perspective, mainly it's support, right? Like we can only support the things we make. and the things we don't make, we can essentially package up what works on our system for others.
Yep. And in terms of like what you're potentially working on, I had a question about like ARM, right? So like I know that obviously Windows is investing in ARM, Valve is investing in ARM. What are the plans there? Do they exist for Bazzite or yeah, more broadly?
Yeah, we're working on it. We have some various test hardware now that we can use to get that up and running. Valve has an ARM native version of Proton that we're eager to play with. So, as upstream kind of gets in line, we'll definitely be putting out some ARM images to play with. I can't really promise what the performance will be like because x86 translation is what it is, but
Yeah,
For sure.
so far it looks quite promising.
you. So you said that you have like some testing hardware there. Is it stuff that other manufacturers, and you don't have to name anybody, but are other manufacturers reaching out to help you with this? Hey, get your stuff working on my hardware.
Yeah, we've had quite a few people reach out. It's been kind of an amazing process.
That's awesome. And you're saying that as though you've been getting bigger along this path. I looked at like the GitHub, and in the README, there's like a big spike in terms of stars. Like I think it was in like January of this year, where like yeah, people were starring it steadily, and then all of a sudden it just like went way up. What happened around there?
Let's see. January. That was a Hacker News article. Someone else posted it, and it just exploded overnight, and our star count went vertical for a short period of time. That one was really cool.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're gonna have to explain stars to the Bills of the world, guys. Nobody knows what you're talking about.
It's just like a bookmark, right? So like when you're on GitHub, you can star a project, basically bookmarking it for later if you want to
Okay.
contribute to it, or if you're just interested in it and want to follow what's going on.
Yeah, or a lot of people don't even use it that way. It's the developer version of a Facebook like.
This is true. Yeah. Yes.
Okay, that makes sense. Very good. Has Valve had anything to say to you about your project?
They have not communicated with me personally, but we've seen them talk about it, so at least they're aware. I think most recently, Digital Foundry did a piece on Bazzite, and there was
They did.
a Valve developer talking in their comment section and retweeting just to kind of reiterate some of their points. So at the very least, they're aware of us.
So you at this point now, you're not like, because you guys are doing everything is like open source, right? So like they can't step in and say, "Hey, that's ours. You can't do that." Like they kind of said something along those lines with Hollow ISO, because Hollow ISO was doing this is, my memory's not great, so maybe I'm remembering something wrong, but I felt like Hollow ISO did something, and then Valve was like, "You're not allowed to do that." And I was wondering if you had heard anything about that.
I'm not privy to that. It might be down to them using various repos that might have been private or update services or something. As far as Valve's packages, they put the license in the actual package build script. So the stuff of theirs that we've taken, we at least know is of a permissive license, and the couple things we don't, we handle in a different way, just to make sure we're not breaking any potential license terms that may come in the future.
Speaking of Valve, like Bill mentioned it at the top, right? Like a lot of people are waiting kind of for SteamOS for all, and to them, I recommend just trying Bazzite, right? Like it's excellent, and it even solves some problems that SteamOS has, as you were alluding to, right? But if you were in their shoes, what do you think are the challenges that Valve is probably seeing when it comes to creating an operating system that anyone can use, right? And not just to a specific hardware.
Yeah, I mean, a big thing is support, right? Um, Without a doubt, we're cheating. We piggyback off of Fedora.
For sure.
So all the
Yeah.
work that Red Hat and the Fedora project put into making their OS great, we get for free, and
Yep.
we get to utilize it. Valve's in a different position. They're based off of Arch, which is bleeding edge, and they're doing snapshots of it with these, in-house changes on top of those snapshots. If they want to go very public and expand to the level of hardware that we're choosing to support, they would need to hire on hundreds of people to support that effort, or bring
Oh,
in some very, very large contractors.
yep.
Which is why I think they're probably aiming for handhelds first, other than the Steam Deck as a support target, because that's a much smaller footprint for them to have to deal with and support long term.
Right.
Well, plus they're all of the handhelds as of right now, outside of I think the MSI Claw, they're all AMD based.
Yep.
So
Yep.
that makes things a lot easier. Like right now, one of the issues with SteamOS is that they don't have any NVIDIA drivers. So when you're piggybacking off Fedora, does Fedora have those AMD or those non AMD drivers that are able to be used in Bazzite?
Not out of the box, and that's just because of what the NVIDIA drivers are. They are closed source and proprietary, meaning the community can't really support them in any way, shape, or form. Any bug is an NVIDIA bug, and the terms of that license mean it's much harder for them to justify shipping. But the Fedora community has long solved this problem. There's multiple different repos that take NVIDIA's closed source drivers and package them for Fedora, and that's what we do. Right now, we're using Negativo as our base. Anytime they update their NVIDIA driver, it automatically gets added to our NVIDIA images, and people get to use them.
So like right now on your website, it says, supports NVIDIA, but you and I were talking before we actually started, and you mentioned that like it doesn't work with game mode. Can you explain that to people? Because there's a lot of people who have NVIDIA hardware and they're like, I want to run SteamOS or Bazzite, but I don't have AMD.
Yeah. Well,
Can you give them any hope?
this is one of the big shames of the hardware scape in Linux right now. Intel and AMD are both gold star, right? They are built into the Linux kernel. They work out of the box. There's nothing anyone needs to do. I mean, I would call that better than Windows. I don't even have to install a driver. It just works. NVIDIA has stayed closed source. There is no open source alternative for them. No viable one, anyway. There's one that exists, but it can't reclock the GPU due to hardware DRM on those cards. So the only method for NVIDIA is to install their proprietary driver, which is closed source. So any bug it has can't be fixed. Valve makes a software called GameScope. That is the compositor, or the display engine that powers game mode. And GameScope is low level. It does a lot of talking directly to the GPU, a lot of careful work like that the NVIDIA driver, as it is today, can't handle. It will crash, it will break, it just doesn't work. And the only people that can fix that, due to how it's built, are NVIDIA. And they've spent a year promising to fix it and not fixing it.
Do they show any sign of changing anytime soon? I ask because, like, with their kind of, endeavor into like data centers and things like that, they seem to be slightly embracing open source more, on at least on that side. And that reminds me of sort of like Microsoft's journey, sort of getting into Azure and embracing open source more as a result. Does NVIDIA show any sign of that as far as you can tell?
They have been getting better.
Okay.
As of now, they have a kernel module that could actually potentially be upstreamed one day. Their actual driver stuff in user space is still closed source, but at least the kernel module is where it needs to be for enterprise. And they're doing more work to support Wayland. Every release gets a little better. Unfortunately, GameScope is still broken. That's kind of one of the most complicated Wayland compositors out there. But they're moving in the right direction. There's a good chance. At this point now, even if they fail to deliver, there are finally open source efforts in development. The NVK project's the most notable one. So as that probably over the next year gets performant and starts to actually kind of run like the NVIDIA driver does, that might be the best path forward, because then it's all open source like it is for AMD now today.
So this doesn't seem like it's a problem that you would be able to, like you and your team or whoever else is working on Linux would be able to fix before Valve. It seems like both you and anybody else doing Linux stuff and Valve are all waiting for NVIDIA to do whatever it is that they need to do, and nobody can push them to do it, and nobody can do it for them. Is that my understanding is correct?
Yeah, we are all in the same boat. The only thing Valve has over us is they are in a better position to push NVIDIA, and I'm
Yeah.
sure they are behind the scenes, but who really knows?
That's right. For Bazzite, going back to Bazzite, there is a lot of focus in a way that I personally enjoy on Steam, right? Like the game mode and things like that. So it's not tightly coupled, but that's it's the recreation of that SteamOS experience. Whereas it seems like I don't know too much, but I understand that Playtron, for example, is trying to build like a more robust front end for beyond Steam, right? And is that something that you would explore for Bazzite, or your team is exploring for Bazzite?
I'd say we're pretty married to how Valve does things. Game mode is what it is, and it's extendable. So if we need
Yeah.
more out of it, we can. But Playtron's method of essentially building their own game mode like front end is certainly interesting, and I'm excited to see what they do with it.
Yeah.
So let's get a little background on you. What's your background in software development that you did before you did all of this stuff?
Yeah. Well, I'm a lifelong software engineer. Even as a kid, right, like 11-year-old me, I was making Half-Life mods just in my spare time for fun. The one I'm most proud of was called City 17 Episode 1. That was a alternative telling of the Half-Life 2 Episode 1 storyline with all of these really cool, advanced graphics features that no other source mod did, like sun rays, parallax mapping. Definitely check it out. There's pictures and stuff out there. But that got me my first job in the game industry. I was invited to work on interdimensional games on a game called Consortium. And I bounced around the game industry for a while. Eventually left for personal reasons and moved on to web development. I did that for 10 years. Really exciting stuff, taxes and company logic and all that.
That's what I do.
And then, toward the tail end of that, I kind of stumbled into Bazzite as this side project. It was, all stuff that I had been working on throughout the pandemic and kind of acquainting myself to, and the stars aligned just the right way. And that brings me to where I am today. Currently, I am a Linux community engineer at Microsoft.
I love that. So that again kind of goes to show like Microsoft is invested in Linux and in open source. Kind of what do you what is your, I guess, day to day in that? Like, what does a Linux community engineer do?
It's mostly work with upstream. I'm under the Azure banner, so it's Linux servers primarily, and it's working with upstream projects to submit changes in a way that is mutually beneficial. Definitely a big change from the way things used to be.
Yeah, for sure.
Going back to City 17, is there an episode 2? We all know there's not an episode 3.
Nah, just the one. And unfortunately, we never got to finish it. Life gets ahead of you. But we did release the source code for that, so I think there's a lot of source mods now based on that work at the very least.
That's awesome.
Very cool.
Swelter is one that I'm aware of. That one's on Steam.
Okay. Wait, is City 17 on? Like, is that playable still?
Probably not. I think it's been broken by engine updates since then, because that would have
Right.
released like 2011.
Right, and we just had the update to Half-Life 2, so...
Yeah, so even
Or
if
beat.
someone got it working, it's probably broken again.
Oh, well, that's how it goes.
You described getting like all the work that Fedora does for free, right? Like sitting on the shoulders of giants, so to speak. And
Yep.
to that, there's another XKCD, right? Like the dependency one, where like everything is like hinging on that one little pillar, holding everything up. This is more for the software dev geeks, but like, who is that to you? Who are those like projects or maintainers that are just holding up everything?
It's one person on GitLab. Their handle is evlav, which is just Valve backwards. And they have the grueling job of taking Valve's packages and making nice, organized repositories for them, since Valve has not done that yet.
That's amazing. Shout out to Evlav.
Yeah,
That's
thank you very
awesome.
much for your work. We could not exist without you.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of not being able to exist without somebody else, what can the Nerd Nest audience do to help make Bazzite better? What is it that other people who are not developers can do to help you guys?
It's feature requests and bug reports. We take every one of them seriously, and they're always appreciated. If you're willing to go the extra mile, our code base is very easy to walk through, and not all of it is, high level, hard to work with codes. A lot of it's just bash scripts. If you're willing to make some easy little thing, like one contributor gave us a script to install just one piece of software, by all means, PR it. We're never ever gonna make fun of you for a PR we don't accept. We're thankful for them.
Yeah. I'm gonna not second that, but I'll say like just even as a software developer, right? Like when I get into code bases that I'm not familiar with, I'm like, oh, I don't think I should do this, right? But like it can be as small as like updating a README, or if you have like a public facing website with the repo in the back end or repo available, maybe it's like fixing a typo, right? And that can't. I know that there are some maintainers that hate that sort of stuff, like just small PRs, but I think just trying it is better than not.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, we
I
want
work
to
in a-
get as many people in as we can, and even
Yeah.
our documentation repo is just markdown files. We'll take anything.
Yep.
Right. So I'm looking over at this screen over here, which has like the questions that we wanted to ask, and you can't see it, but I can see it. That Rich pasted his questions in using Markdown. So like it's got Markdown stuff in there, and I don't really know what Markdown is, but I kind of know what Markdown is. Mostly, it's typing without using a mouse, I think.
It's super intuitive. It's just a way of writing like formatted text files, right? Formatted documents, but in just like plain text. So like a heading is just like a hashtag, right? So like I say that because that's all readmes are written in Markdown. So just learning, these little markups it's fairly simple and intuitive.
So what's next for Bazzite?
It's a great question. Mainly right now it's just kind of keeping things running, right? We just did the huge update from Fedora 40 to 41, so now it's getting ready for 42 and just following along with improvements, in the meantime.
Very
All right,
cool.
settle a debate: KDE or GNOME? You don't have to answer that, but yeah.
I think
Have I-
they're both. I'm going to buck the trend here. They're both good.
Yeah.
I have
agree.
no problem
I
with
agree.
either. I
Yeah.
use GNOME on all of my hardware because I like that user experience, but I still use KDE on my Steam Deck. I use KDE on my home theater PC. They're both good for different reasons. It's down to preference.
Yep.
And this is one I might actually know. Let me know if I get this wrong, guys. So, when you boot into desktop mode on a Steam Deck, you boot into KDE, which is their desktop environment, which is basically like, the start button and all that stuff. When you install Bazzite on a piece of hardware, like, for instance, I did it on my ROG Ally X, and you boot into desktop mode, you get booted into GNOME, and things look a little, well, I don't know if it's GNOME, but things look a little bit different. And so things are not exactly in all of the same places that you're used to, but they're just different graphical user interfaces for interacting with Linux, so you don't have to type in command line nonsense. Am I getting that right?
Close. This changed very recently. The initial release of Bazzite was KDE only, and we ported Valve's themes. So installing Bazzite and SteamOS and going to the desktop would actually be completely identical.
Oh, mine looks weird.
But KDE just did this huge update to KDE 6 that made a ton of improvements and also changed a lot of their user experience. We followed that. So now if you install SteamOS, you're getting KDE 5, Bazzite is KDE 6, and optionally it's GNOME 47.
Yeah, I was gonna say you could have downloaded the GNOME image, right? And if you downloaded the GNOME image, you're gonna get the GNOME interface.
Right.
And so
or you're
we
getting
should
KDE 7, and that will look different enough to be like, hey, what's going on here?
so we should look forward to probably what will happen in the future is when Valve updates again, maybe next year or something, they might move up to KDE 7 like you guys are. So you're ahead of the curve.
Yeah, there's evidence they're doing that, and we updated their themes to KDE 7, so there's a chance they catch up and look exactly like we do today.
So you're saying there's a chance. Awesome. Kyle, where can people find you and your stuff and anything else that you want to shout out right now?
All of my links are on my personal GitHub. That's probably the best place to check. Shout out wise, I just want to say thanks to all the other Linux distros in this space. We would not exist without Nobara, without CachyOS, without Chimera OS, or even Jovian Nix. That might be new to everyone. That's essentially a Nix OS version of what we are.
Oh.
Thank you to all of those projects. All of you have been incredibly helpful and just so willing to share, what it is you work on and do. And I'm glad that we can be in a position to give back.
And links to his stuff are going to be in the description down below, so make sure that you click on that. Go check out his stuff, and hey, maybe even you could mark down or mark up a GitHub PR. I don't know what I just said,
No,
but I
you said
said
it.
something.